Hi guys, we're back in the shop for part 2 of our chainsaw series, and what we're going to be doing today is maintaining the cutting gear on the saw, or the most parts of it. As we said in the last video, our cutting gear is made up of 3 components. Number 1, a drive sprocket attached to the engine or the power source of the chainsaw. Number 2 is the chain, and number 3 then is the guide bar on which the chain sits on. Now there's different styles of drive sprocket. This one in particular has what's called an outboard clutch, where the clutch is outside the drive sprocket. And I'll just show you that there. We'll take this off, and we're going to be disassembling this anyway in a minute. Okay, so we take our casing off. I've cleaned up this saw with compressed air to try and take all the gunk and the dust and the grease out of it. If you don't have a compressed air source, maybe a good stiff brush or maybe some lollipop sticks or something like that to poke out the dirt out of the various areas. One recommendation I'd make is wear safety glasses if you are using compressed air, because you're dealing with so many nooks and crannies and recesses. It's pretty much a guarantee that it's going to blow back into your eyes. So anyway, here's our clutch, and as I rotate the clutch, or the clutch housing, you'll see that the chain moves. That's because the sprocket is inside the clutch, and to change that sprocket, which is just a little gear, we need to take off the clutch. I'm not going to do that today. I know that the dry sprocket is good on this saw because I changed it recently enough. And what I might do is do a third video with sort of slightly more advanced maintenance of a saw, including air filter, spark plug, changing the dry sprocket. So just as a frame of reference, I rooted out the other saw and gave that a clean as well. And what we can see here on this, right, and we might zoom in a little bit, right, just here, this is the dry sprocket, and that's what drives the chain. Now, whether this will work for us or not, I don't know. But that sprocket is easy enough to replace. It's held in place there by a little circlip, which is just pops off, and then you can actually take the sprocket off and change it. So there's a number of different styles of clutches. These are rim sprockets, and they can be inboard or outboard. And then there's spur sockets, which are more like a sort of a traditional gear. So just to let you know that your sprocket may not be readily accessible, and you may need to take the clutch off, which we will deal with in a later video. Now, the recommendation for dry sprockets is you should be changing your dry sprocket every 2 to 3 new chains. If the dry sprocket wears and the drive links waggle inside in that, or that there's too much play in it, what will happen then is that the drive links going into the back of the bar will get distorted or bent, or there's going to be damage to them and the chain won't run right. So we'll put this fellow away now. So, back to our saw. And as I said, our cutting gear is made up of those 3 components: dry sprocket, chain, bar. If any of them aren't right, the saw will not cut properly. There's really no point in having a razor sharp chain on a guide bar that's bent or crooked, and that won't go through a cut cleanly for you. If the dry sprocket is damaged, you'll also have problems. Not only that, but on your chain here, there's left teeth and there's right teeth pointing forward always. And that's one thing to get right. Make sure that your chain is on the right way. If those teeth aren't of a consistent length, what happens is one tooth will cut deeper than the other. So your right hand teeth will cut deeper, we'll say. And what will happen then is, as you're going through a piece of wood, you'll cut an arc in the piece of wood. The bar is straight, and as you progress through that arc, that piece of wood will just jam up the bar then and kill your teeth and your bar, okay? Another additional point is that there's left teeth and right teeth, and in front of each one, and again, we'll try and zoom in here as best we can, okay? What we're looking at here, that's a left-hand tooth there. In front of that is a right-hand tooth. In front of each tooth is a little humpy thing there, and what they are is depth gauges, or sometimes called rakers. And if you'll notice as well, teeth are pointed upwards at an angle. The logic behind that is that there's clearance behind the tooth to let out the chip as it hits the wood, or as it cuts out the chip of wood. These rakers or depth gauges here dictate the bite or the aggression that the saw eats into the wood. If you sharpen your teeth and the teeth go down and you don't file down these depth gauges, what will happen then is that the saw will have no bite, and you won't make any progress through wood. You'll be sort of cutting sort of very, very small chips or heading towards dust. If you take these rakers down too much, what you'll find then is the saw becomes very aggressive and is trying to take out too big a chip, and it'll bog the saw down because the saw won't have the torque or the horsepower to push through that. So for every chain, there's a recommended distance between the top of the tooth and the top of this raker or depth gauge here. And that sort of brings me on to my next point. When we go looking at maintaining the cutting gear on a saw, we need to know what type of chain this is. And if I hold this one up, okay, on the drive links there, on the straps, we can actually see that it's an Oregon chain. And then written on the drive links is a number called 95. What I can do then is go onto the Oregon website, download the recommended angles, clearances, and the file required to sharpen this chain, okay? I'll just stick a picture up there, or a screenshot of what those parameters are. I'm also going to put in the description down below a link to the full Oregon chain range, as it were. And as you go through those, you'll see there that there's different recommendations for angles, clearances, etc., for each chain, okay? So, getting back now, and there's two ways we look at this. Number one, we find out the chain that we have when we look up the specs. We get the right size file, which is very key. And then we also get the correct filing angle so that when we're filing the teeth, that we can actually file the teeth correctly, okay? Because they must be filed to the correct angle. Notwithstanding that, and there's part of this video is to sort of address it, is if you have a chainsaw and you cannot find out the manufacturer of the chain or the manufacturer of the bar, what size or whatever it is, a good rule of thumb is that when you're sharpening a chain and the file is in the tooth, there should be 80% of the file inside the tooth and 20% above it, sort of an 80-20 rule. Additionally as well, now whether I'll be able to catch this or not is a different story. We'll zoom in as close as we can, right? This will probably fall apart now on me. But on the back of each tooth there's a little line, a little witness mark. And what that witness mark tells us is two things. Number one, the correct filing angle. And number two then, that when it hits that particular mark, your chain is over, okay? You can't sharpen or use a chain beyond that point because you'll have no hook. Now, from a chain sharpening, or the desired objectives of chain sharpening, okay? Again, what we're trying to do now is sharpen two sides of the tooth, or each tooth, okay? There's the top plate here, and then there's the side wall here. And as you sharpen through at the correct angle, you're going to be pushing up slightly. Now, not going mad, right? Pushing up slightly and trying to create a small point there on the edge of each tooth. And we can see with this one that this one obviously hit something, probably earth or something like that, because there's no actual damage to the teeth, but the little tips are all gone, okay? So we need to sharpen them up. Now, from a chainsaw operation point of view, if you hit anything other than wood with those teeth, the teeth are now blunt. It'll whip that little corner off there, and that's the corner that sort of is the leading cut into the wood. The rest of the tooth and the gullet then underneath it is designed to scoop out the chip that it takes. But if you have no point up on the corner of your tooth, you're not going anywhere. Right, so on we go. As I said, our objective here and our overriding objective is we want to have sharp teeth of a consistent length left to right, okay, running on a straight, and straight I mean it's not bent, guide bar, which is also even as well. And when I say even, what I mean is that the chain is running on these two top rails here, and those two top rails must be even. If you see a burr lifted anywhere on the bar, that needs to be filed down, and then maybe a slight run of a flat file over the top to level out that guide bar. So, just to re-emphasize, our objective is to have sharp teeth of a consistent length between left and right, running smoothly on a straight and even guide bar, and then with enough but not too much bite. And the bite is dictated by the depth gauges there. So if you've successfully sharpened all your teeth and you're still not getting a good cut, measure up the gap between the top of the tooth and the depth gauge to make sure that there's enough there that the chainsaw can take a bite. Now, I've gone through the minimum tools that we need, which is the flat file, round file, whether it comes with an angle gauge or not, and then our multi-tool. So they're the three ones we need absolutely at a minimum. Beyond that then, we'll say to improve our lot in life, what we have here is just this little bit of metal. It's a bar cleaner for cleaning out gunk up and down the bar and around. And what's very important as well is when we're cleaning up the bar to make sure that the oil holes on the bar are clean and free of movement to allow the saw push oil into the bar and around that groove. In addition, what we have here as well is a depth gauge. And the way the depth gauge works is after we've sharpened our teeth, we put this over two different teeth, okay? And then we'll be able to see whether or not we have the rakers filed down enough or enough of a bite there, okay? So we'll come back to that in a while. But first things first anyway, we'll disassemble our cutting gear. So off it comes. Take off our bar. And I did want to point out, or do it in more detail as well anyway, right? Here is the oil outlet from the oil pump, okay? When you strap the bar onto the saw, what you'll see at the back of the bar is these holes here, okay? And there are oil inlet holes, and we want to make sure that they're clean. And in this particular case, they could do it a bit of cleaning, okay? So we'll clean them out as part of our bar maintenance program. Okay, right, away we go. First thing we're going to do, or our order of events, is we've broken down the saw, which is fine. We're going to dress the bar, which is just sort of a technical word for filing off any burrs and making sure that it's level. The next thing we do then is we remount the bar and the cutting gear. We'll put the chainsaw into a vise, and what we'll do is we'll sharpen the teeth, and then we'll move on to setting the depth gauges on the chain once we have the teeth sharp, okay? So, away we go. Now, we're set up in the vise. I've basically clamped it onto the bar. Don't go to town on it now. You don't want to put a dent or anything like that into your bar. But the bar itself should hold the weight of the saw away fine. Now, when I'm doing this, I tighten up my bar tensioning screw quite tight so that the chain doesn't really lift. The object behind that is that as you're filing forward, you don't want the chain to fall over too much. Now, what I have here, I have my 4.8mm file, which is as recommended by Oregon for this 95 VPX chain. I have a file gauge here, and on the file gauge there's little lines there to tell me that my angle is correct. And secondly as well is that on that spec for sharpening this 95 VPX chain, it also indicates an upward angle, so pointing slightly up towards the point of the tooth, a 10-degree lift. So what I do is I get a marker, start out, blacken up one tooth, so that you're not doubling up your work or sharpening teeth more often than you need to. And basically what I do then is apply the chain brake, put my file in, and then follow that angle. So that's the angle I'm at there now. I don't know whether the camera will pick up the angle on the file, but that should also correspond with the angle on the back of the tooth, the little witness guide, okay? So what we're looking to do here is maybe give each of these 4 or 5 whips just to sharpen it up. There's no particularly damaged tooth on this, so they're all pretty much even. If you have one which is damaged, you're going to have to file all the teeth down to that damaged one, or the level of that damaged one, to ensure that you have consistent length, left and right always. If you don't have that consistent length between the left and the right cutters, you just will not cut properly. The saw will be arcing and binding up the bar in it, okay? So remember now, a file only sharpens in one direction, which is forward, okay? So away we go. Right, now we have sharpened the teeth on the saw. What we're going to do next then is investigate our depth gauges. And our depth gauges are these fellas in front of each individual teeth, both left and right. Now, the spec for my chain requires a 0.025 inch depth. So what we do there is we stick our depth gauge on top of 2 teeth, and then the depth gauge should pop up in between. These ones are pretty good. You can see there that they don't stick up a whole lot above it. I wouldn't expect them to, because it's a reasonably new chain, and it only got blunt on the very corner of the teeth. But what we'll do is we'll mark again, and we'll just give them one rub just to clean them up and tidy them up, okay? Now, we're back to our yellow tooth, and we're now done. So, as it stands at the moment now, what we've done is dress the guide bar, make sure that there's no burrs, make sure that it's straight, clean, receiving oil down through the passages. We sharpened our teeth left and right reasonably consistently. We gave them each 6 strokes to bring them to a point. And then we just tidied up our depth gauges. They didn't really need filing down, more a case of just giving them a freshen up, okay? Now, that's the main steps in sharpening a chain and maintaining your cutting gear. Just a few points I forgot as I was going along there. As regards cost, files should generally be maybe €150, at most €2, depending on the particular brand. So don't be afraid to pick up a number of them, or a box of 12, or whatever is available anyway. Over time, you should be gathering together little bits of maintenance kit for your saw. They're fantastic tools, they're very productive, and they're well worth investing in. Maybe a new chain now and again, or a new bar, or change out your dry sprocket, or send it in for a servicing. As regards the actual hand sharpening procedure, it's generally or it's widely recognized that you'll have a bias to one side or the other. And what will happen is, whatever way the orientation is, you might be left-handed, right-handed, it's easier to file one set of teeth than it is the other set of teeth. So over time, what you'll have to do is compensate for that. And if you find yourself getting a good sharpening of the left-hand teeth, you might need to pay a bit more attention to the right, or maybe do sort of 4 swipes on the left teeth, 6 to the right, to compensate for your sharpening bias, so to speak. But I suppose all in all, there's a bit of trial and error in it. I would recommend that if you're out for a day using a chainsaw, every time you fill up the fuel, which would be about every half hour, 40 minutes, depending on your use, have your file out, just give them one little rub, and it keeps them fresh and it keeps them sharp. Like we say, when a saw is operating correctly, when you put the saw down on a piece of wood, it should nearly do the work for you. There's no pushing, pulling, nothing like that. It should eat or scoop out the wood chips out of it. Over time then, obviously, they do get dull from just use through wood or whatever, and especially if you hit something. If you hit anything at all, you're going to need to maintain your chain. So that's about it. I put a few links in the description down below for the Oregon book that gives you all the sharpening angles and characteristics for every type of chain. And I've also stuck in a link. It's an Irish company called screwfix.ie for that Oregon sharpening kit, which comes with a pile of stuff in it. Might be a good place to start. I'd say if you go into your own local chainsaw shop, they'll have little kits there with a flat file, maybe a bar cleaner, a round file, in all different sizes for different chains. And different chains obviously then take different size files depending. So that's about it. Listen, if you have any questions or queries, stick them in the comments down there, and actually down there, I think. Yeah, and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. All right?